Okay, so this switch statement is actually much easier to read than those ifs that we had before, especially when you get a long list of ifs. Sometimes it's really worth going, hey, switch statement makes a lot of sense. It's especially hard to think about switch if you're coming from C, where you had been switching on a single thing. Whereas here you can have, as we have, three completely different cases in here, and they could be much more complicated. All these are using N, but another case could use completely different variables or completely different conditions. So let's see if I haven't forgotten anything. Go. All right, there we go. So now we've got odds, evens, zeros, and that. So great. Now, suppose that we wanted to terminate this switch a bit early. If you notice in here, we could say, okay, well, I'm done here. I want to get out of this here. Now, we don't need to do that like we would in C. There's no fall through happening here because that happened on the first time that case hit. But we may want to, if there was some other condition, actually terminate completely. So break can be used. So for example, there could be some sort of if in here, and you could say, okay, well, get out of here if that thing happens, otherwise do some other stuff. But the other thing we can do is we can give up completely if there's a problem. So for example, I'm going to use break here to get out of this switch and to get out of the loop. So I'm going to go back and put that keyword abort in here. So here's a label abort. And I'm going to change this slightly so that it recognizes odd numbers directly. So I'm going to say that. Right, so it's counting zeros, evens, and odds. And then if it comes across something else that's not one of those two things, then we can abort. Now, let's go into here and we're going to go break, abort, like that. Okay, so what happens in this loop now is if there's a negative number, none of the previous three cases apply and the default actually happens. You might be wondering about this case here for when the number is negative or the case above, but in fact when you do mod a negative number you still get negative something, so neither of those cases will apply in the case where it's negative, and you'll hit the default and we will actually break from the loop. And if you take a quick look up here, go run, it's only counted two even numbers. It hasn't counted the number 10, which is after the negative number, because it broke at that point. But we can make it a bit more explicit, and this is where you might actually use this kind of thing. Let's make ourselves an error. So we'll have this error here, and in the case that there's a negative number, we'll actually set that error, and I'm going to use the errors package. I'm going to import that, and I'm going to say new error, found negative number. And so there's that set, and then at the bottom here we can actually say, you know, if there was an error, let's just print it out. Error. Let's print the error like that. So we'll do that and let's just run it. Error, found a negative number, and it broke from the loop at that point. So the break statement within a switch here can jump out of the switch and out of the loop using a label, which is handy. And of course it's nothing like in C where you have to break every case within the switch because otherwise it will fall through. You can also do continue. Another thing we could do here is we could modify this slightly so that if it sees an odd number, it just carries on but doesn't count it. So, sorry, a negative number. So let's just do this. Let's just move the total down to here. So it only counts if it gets to here. And every time we get a negative, we don't need this anymore. We don't need this. And let's kill this. So this has been cleaned up a little bit. Every time it gets a negative number, it's going to continue to that abort label up here. And perhaps we should say, let's change that to ignore negatives, since abort doesn't seem like a very good name anymore. And let's run that. So now you can see the three even numbers because it did actually count the 10 at the end. And what it did was when it hit that negative, it jumped across. And you can also see that there's a total of 9 things counted. If we were just to add in here len numbers, just so we can see how many there were. You can see there were 10 in total, so we ignored one. So that's really continue and break within the context of a switch and a for loop, both useful in some circumstances.